you for joining us today. My name is Victor. I'm the Senior Manager from Jurong Point Learning Center, and I'll be your MC for this afternoon. Before we start the webinar, if you have any questions relevant to this webinar, we do appreciate if you could post your queries in the Q&A feature shown below. Our Q&A session will be at the end of the talk, and this will be for about 10 to 15 minutes. Our speakers from DAS Academy and our learning centers will be available to answer your questions live. If you're interested in our courses and workshops related to this talk, we'll be featuring the upcoming courses and links that will be posted in the chat box. Without further ado, do sit back and enjoy the talk. And I'd like to welcome the speaker, Ms. Siti.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to webinar 6 by the DAS Academy. My name is Mariam, and I'll be sharing with you a few strategies, a couple of strategies that you could try with your child or your learner to help them develop comprehension skills in order to access the text that they're reading. So before I start, do pardon me if there's any background noise. You may hear the occasional plane passing by. All right. Okay, back to the session. Now, the first thing that we need to understand here is that comprehension in itself is made up of many, many skills. Okay, what we see in schools are the comprehension passages and questions that accompany these passages actually requires a combination of all these comprehension skills, both to understand the passage and to answer the questions. So what we will be looking at today will be a general overview of all the different skills needed with a couple of related strategies. Okay, so before we go on to that, right, I want you to try and put yourselves in the shoes of a child with dyslexia. Okay, I'm going to show you a text. Some of you may have seen the text before, and I want you to try and read the text in about 30 seconds. Okay, let me go on to the text. All right, here's the text. Are you ready? Okay, I'm going to start the timer. 30 seconds starts now. Okay, so try and make sense of the words that you see in the passage. And do take note, all right? I will be asking some questions after this. Okay, so read the text carefully. Okay, you have about 10 more seconds. I'll try and put the sounds together to make sense of the words. Okay, 30 seconds up. Okay, I know that's not a lot of time, but I hope that some of you managed to finish reading the text. So, my first question is, who is the main character? Okay, you can actually put your answers on the chat for today's webinar. We've enabled the chat function. So we would like to see if any of you have been able to figure out who is the main character. So Catherine, yes, a little girl. You're almost there, that's right. Once, okay. Anyone else? Okay, so I'm just going to go on to my second question. You can add on. Who did the main character live with? So Catherine, you said little girl. Yes, Kay also said little girl. So who did this? Yes, thank you, Libin. Yes, her mother. How do you all manage to figure out that she was living with her mother? Right. Okay, my third question. Where was the cottage? So if I'm saying cottage, that means there's some cottage somewhere in the text. So where was the cottage? She stayed with her mother in a cottage. But where is this cottage? Did any one of you manage to figure out where this cottage is? If I were to read, first sentence, forest. Yes, thank you, Kay. So if I were to try and read, the first sentence, it goes, actually the sentence is, once upon a time, okay, there was a little girl who lived with her mother in a little cottage on the edge of a large, dark forest. So you're right, Angel and Kay. It is a little girl, okay, for the rest of you, and she does stay in a cottage with her mother. And so do you know now what is the passage about? Okay, if I tell you my fourth question, you may be able to figure out what the passage is. So if you look towards the end of the passage, question 4, why did people call her Red Riding Hood? So do you know why people called her the Red Riding Hood? If you tap on your prior knowledge, you've read Red Riding Hood before, you'll be able to figure out why people called her Red Riding Hood. But I'm glad that quite a number of you managed to figure out, right, that it was a little girl in the passage. She lived with her mother and they lived in the forest. So yes, well done. You managed to figure it out. This story is about a little girl, or more specifically, Little Red Riding Hood. So I'm curious, how you all tried to make sense of this passage. But regardless how you tried to make sense of this passage, I think the fact that this passage is all made up of nonsense words, and then you were tasked to answer questions on it, some of you could have felt anxious, stressed. Okay, maybe you're thinking, I only have 30 seconds to complete reading this. How is that enough time? Okay, some of you could have felt frustrated, confused, asking yourselves if you're even reading it correctly and if it's all making sense to you. So perhaps, you all could actually put it in the chat as well. How do you all feel trying to make sense of this passage and then answering questions related to the nonsense passage? Yes, thank you, Ross. You mentioned you felt stressed. Yes, I think the fact that it was all nonsense, confused, frustrated, right? So quite a number of confused and frustrated. Now, Wendy, interestingly, you mentioned that you felt dejected. There's an interesting use of a word. Angel just read it as it was, and some of you did feel lost. So, of course, some of you also, if you are not anywhere close to the end of the passage, and you see that timer ticking away, I put the time pressure on you, right? Some of you could have started to feel helpless and give up trying. Okay, so, but I wanted to just let you all know, thank you for sharing your feelings quite openly. There's nothing wrong with all those feelings, because bear in mind that the passage was made up of nonsense words. There were extra processes involved before you could even focus on the meaning of the passage. And therefore, in a sense, your inability to answer the questions could be attributed to slow and inaccurate wording. Okay, so this is one reason why some children with dyslexia have problems with reading comprehension. It is due to that slow and inaccurate reading because they have not reached a certain level of reading fluency. Okay, so that leaves them with few attentional resources available for comprehension. So if you look at the definition of dyslexia, it is a learning difficulty that primarily affects the skills involved in accurate and fluent word reading and spelling. So if you look at the slide, you will see the characteristic features of dyslexia are firstly, difficulties in phonological awareness, okay? And that is basically associating the sounds to the correct letters and vice versa. Okay, then we have verbal memory, which is a component of working memory, as well as processing speed. So just to illustrate, okay, a child with poor phonological awareness may struggle to decode words, and this affects reading fluency. So if a child is able to make the letter sound association, but has poor memory, he or she may struggle to hold sounds in their mind long enough to decode an unfamiliar word, okay, because the sound disappears from his or her memory before it can even be used to sound out the word. Okay, so let's use the word splash as an example. Okay, so splash has 5 sounds. S, sh. Okay, now the working memory capacity of a typically developing child or adult is about plus to minus 7 pieces of information. Okay, however, for a child with dyslexia or specific learning difficulty, this is usually much lesser, around 2 to 3 pieces of information. So let's go back to the word splash. Okay, 5 sounds. Okay, so a child with dyslexia may go s, and then what was the first sound again? Or even what was the second sound? But so because they cannot remember the first word, the first sound, or even the second sound too, they cannot put the sounds together in order to read the word. So they cannot hold all the sounds together long enough to read a word. And because of that, reading and then comprehending can be challenging. So if reading a single word can be a struggle, what more an entire text? Okay, the effort taken to decode an entire text may not leave them with any mental energy left to focus on its meaning. So imagine if you're trying to decode almost every single word in a text. Now, every word, you're trying to put the sounds together. This takes up a lot of mental effort. Okay? If you don't have that automaticity, you don't have that fluency. So by the time you reach the end of the text, you are so fatigued that you can't even focus on what the text means. So the longer the text, the more difficult, more effortful it is to read. So this causes them to tire mentally and physically easily. So because of this, this does lead to reading comprehension problems. So when you're not able to focus on the meaning of the text, you're not able to access the information enough to answer the questions, right? Now, a person with dyslexia may also be unable to hold in memory the content of the text, especially like the sequence of events that happen in the text. So when we read a text, right, we comprehend the meaning of the text by keeping in mind what we have already read and then updating our understanding of the story as we continue to read. But if you have working memory difficulties, you may not be able to hold the content of the last paragraph or the last sentence even when you move on to the next paragraph or the next sentence. So your comprehension of the entire passage is kind of disjointed, in bits and pieces. You remember something from here, from there, but what you remember is not a complete whole. So it's kind of like all over the place. Now, the other thing is, writers don't always explain everything that happens in a story or a text. We kind of have to use clues to figure out what is not stated. If, for example, if you look at the picture of the snowman, now for this one, right, a reader also needs prior knowledge. So what happens here is that you need to know the characteristics of the snowman. You need to have an understanding of what the weather is like in Florida. So prior knowledge is, in fact, another skill that is needed for reading comprehension. But we will get to that later. So with that prior knowledge, and by looking at the clues in the picture, we can infer that the snowman did not want to go to Florida, because he's melting. A snowman will usually melt when it is warm, and Florida is very hot. There's not snow there. So since the snowman is a cold place, the snowman is basically saying that he needs a new travel agent who understands his needs. So here, some inference is needed, and prior knowledge to understand the message behind it. And if you look at in our syllabus, our exams, our tests, inference questions are usually more difficult to answer, even for students without dyslexia. It is, in fact, a high order skill that most learners with dyslexia have trouble with. Because again, like I've mentioned, writers don't always explain everything that happens in a story or a text. They need to use the clues, or they need to read between the lines to figure out what is not stated. So most times, learners with dyslexia are not able to do this, and therefore they struggle with inferential type comprehension questions. Let me move on to my next slide. Now, these are all the skills needed to construct meaning, right? And as you can see, prior knowledge and inferring are included in this list. So let me just briefly go through the different skills. But for today's session, I will be sharing a couple of ways on how you can build up inferencing skills separately before you get the learner to transfer that skill and apply it to comprehension passages. So firstly, it is important to ensure that the learner has relevant prior knowledge to access a text. So activating that prior knowledge means that the learner is making connections to the text and fitting the text to their own experiences. So they try to relate to the text based on existing schemas that they already have. So they're trying to make sense of what they read by seeing how it fits with what they already know. So without that prior knowledge, right, the learner will have difficulties understanding a text, forming a mental picture of the text and relating to the text. So if I were to give you a very simple example, let's just volcano, for example. Let's say the learner has no prior knowledge about volcanoes, has never seen a volcano, has never watched a movie or documentaries about volcanoes. They perhaps has seen a picture of a volcano, but has no idea, what it is, what it does, the distraction that it causes. Okay, so, and you give the child a comprehension passage of it, and as he reads it, he cannot relate to the text, he cannot try and visualize what happens, he cannot try and follow the story, okay, in the passage. So the prior knowledge is lacking, and therefore it affects his whole understanding of the passage. Okay. Now next we have visualizing. Okay. Now visualizing parts of the story in their mind as they read. So create those mind movies. Okay. It actually helps to clarify information and increase understanding. So what happens here is when you generate an image while you're reading, it actually requires you to be actively engaged in the text. Okay. So by creating mental images from the words on the page or on the screen, you are tapping into both the verbal as well as the visual spatial representational system. Okay, so it makes the abstract concepts, okay, the words on the page, on the screen, and you make it into concrete. Okay, so you visualize it in your mind, so from the abstract to the concrete. Okay, and it makes it more meaningful and memorable. So they are able to understand the text better with that visual imagery that they've created in their mind. Okay, so the next one is inferring, but as that is the focus of today's session, I will save that for later. So let's move on to point 4, asking questions. Okay, readers ask themselves questions as they read, to make sense of the text. Okay, I'm sure when you read a passage, when you read a book, a novel, you'll be asking certain questions like, hey, what's going to happen next? How come it is like that? Okay, so you're actually creating this inner conversation with yourself. You are reading to search for answers or for deeper understanding. And the questions that you're asking actually can pertain to the text content, the structure, or the language. So having these inner conversations, asking yourselves questions, okay, as you read, it shows again that you're being actively engaged in the text. Okay, it shows that you're constructing meaning and you're not just reading for the sake of reading, right? And in line with that, being able to determine the main idea helps readers to recall important information. Okay, so locating the main idea and significant details helps the reader understand the points that the writer is attempting to express. Okay, so when you identify the relationship between the main idea and the significant details, it helps to improve comprehension as well. So the ability to identify the main idea in the text, whether it is stated directly or inferred, is actually critical for students to gain meaning when reading. Okay, and lastly, synthesizing information. Now, this requires a student to process and interact with the information. Okay, so it involves merging new information with existing knowledge to create a new idea and see a new perspective or form a new line of thinking. Okay, so if I were to use an analogy, okay, you throw a rock into a pond. Okay, first you hear the splash, okay, and then the water ripples out and it makes little waves that get bigger and bigger. So it's the same as reading. Okay, as you read, right, you come across something new, and then there's that aha moment. So that's like the rock, okay, that splashes into the pond. Okay, and as you continue to read, okay, the meaning gets bigger and bigger. Okay, your understanding grows as you encounter new information, and eventually all these new pieces of information will add up together to form a new thought. Okay, so they all merge together, just like how the ripples in the water will merge together with the water in the pond. So all these skills are needed to construct meaning. All these skills are needed to develop the comprehension so that they are able to understand the text that they are reading. So these skills need to be taught individually, okay? And then it's more cumulative in nature. You put them together in order for them to transfer that learning to a comprehension passage. So let's go back to inferring. Okay, so making inferences is especially hard, okay, when reading fiction because authors don't always write how a character feels. Okay, they simply write what's happening. Okay, so you need to think like a character and understand the plot to guess what the character thinks and what the character feels. So to make that inference, a student must make a logical connection between two or more ideas in the text. Okay, so they need to read between the lines. And research shows if a student can make inferences with pictures, with comics, with videos, they can make them with words. Okay, So making inferences is indeed, it is a higher order thinking skill, but it may seem like an abstract skill to teach because it seems so difficult. But there are methods, there are ways for teaching inference, and we could start with pictures. This makes inference more approachable for any learner, for any teacher. So one simple strategy, if you look at the slide, to help students learn to make logical inferences based on clues that they infer is from looking at a picture. So this strategy works well because it engages students' natural curiosity. So try to use wordless pictures or books, to avoid them using the text to tell you what's happening. Because you want them to make their own guesses or inference just purely based on the pictures and looking at the clues in it. So you could ask questions like, oh, what's happening in this picture? And then you could emphasize, oh, how do you know? How can you be sure? What clues do you see? What do you already know about what you see? Try and get them to bring in their own prior knowledge as well. All right. Now, besides using pictures, you can also use nonsense words to develop inference skills. So students will actually learn how to use the contextual clues in the text to figure out the meaning of the nonsense word. So again, in the slide, you will see the passage, Mom, when we get to Langos, can we please get a box of snooper weasels? My teacher says they are very tasty and healthy. She also says they are high in vitamin D, which is good for my bones. So then you can ask the child to figure out, what is snooper weasels? How do you know that is a snooper weasel? What are the clues that tell you this is a snooper weasel? So you can actually come up with your own nonsense word, but have the contextual clues around that nonsense word to help the child try and figure out what that is. So you're trying to build the inference. You're trying to also develop the skill of looking around the text, looking out for contextual clues to help them figure out what is not being stated directly. Okay, so you can also use an animated video to help your child develop inference skills. So videos let your child practice the skill of making inferences without having to worry about the mechanics of reading, like decoding words. I would suggest wordless animated videos, because they require your child to infer an entire plot, without the dialogue or the text influencing them. So it actually gives them a lot of practice in building up their inferring skills. So I'm going to be showing a short clip of a wordless animated video. You can actually Google for such videos online, but of course be sure to watch the videos before showing it to the child, to make sure it's appropriate. So what I'm going to be showing you is it's actually an Oscar-nominated short film. It's about 3 minutes long. It's called Octopoly. You can actually try, as you watch the video, you can try making your own inferences. So I'll be playing the video, but I may not play the whole video. I may stop it halfway. Just try. Okay. So this is half of the video. So wordless animated videos are actually good for inference because the child has to refer to the various clues that are available. So you know the things that take place, the facial expressions, the rhythm of the music, to make sense of the plot. So as you and your child, your learner, watch the video together, you can ask questions like, oh, what's a man's job? How do you know? Where does the story take place? Okay, they may not have the background knowledge to guess accurately, but they can guess the climate, the environment. Then you can also ask questions like, oh, how does the orange octopus feel? How does the pink octopus feel? How does the man feel? Okay, how do you know? In fact, you should be asking how do you know questions throughout, okay, whether it's a video or a picture. Okay, and then you could end off by asking, oh, what do you think happens after the film? Okay, after that, importantly, make sure to explain to your child how inferences work. If, for example, you can ask her, you know, what she would infer if she looked out the window, okay, and saw people carrying their umbrellas, using their umbrellas. You tell her that you can actually make smart guesses, you know, if you think of your own experiences and look for clues. If you think about it, students are actually making a lot of inferences in their daily life. Okay, so they may be in the room, but they hear the booming sound of thunder, okay, and within minutes they will hear the pitter patter, you know, of water against the windows. So they can infer that, oh, a thunderstorm is happening. Or if they're in a room and they're by the road and they hear a bang, a crash, they can infer things as well. So we tell them that you have already been making inferences a lot in your daily life. So when you translate it to text, when you translate it to comprehension passages, it makes it less intimidating for them because they recognize that, hey, I've actually been doing this all along. It's just that now I need to transfer that skill to a text. Okay, so you can even model how you make inferences. Okay, so you could say, oh, the orange octopus saw the sign on the side of the bus, so he must be thinking the pink octopus is in trouble since the man seems to want to sell the pink octopus for food. So by verbalizing your thought processes, okay, the child has a better understanding of how to craft their own inferences. Okay, so this modeling is especially important for effective comprehension strategy instruction. Okay, so effective comprehension strategy instruction is explicit. Okay, so research shows that explicit teaching techniques are particularly effective for comprehension strategy instruction. So when we talk about explicit instruction, okay, teachers tell readers why and when they should use the strategies, what strategies to use, and how to apply them. Okay, so the steps of explicit instruction typically include, okay, firstly, direct explanation, okay, teacher modeling, this is where the thinking aloud happens, guided practice, and application. Okay, so when we are at direct explanation, you explain to the student why the strategy helps comprehension and when to apply the strategy. Okay, in modeling, okay, the teacher models or demonstrates how to apply the strategy, usually by thinking aloud. Okay, so you model the verbal thought process so the learner, you know, can internalize the questions that they need to ask themselves or the process that they need to follow. Then we have guided practice, when the teacher guides and assists the students as they learn how and when to apply the strategy. So at this stage, it is still very much a scaffolded process. Okay, perhaps the teacher-student distribution could start from 80%, you know, teacher assists, then 20% students do, then gradually reduce that teacher-student distribution. So essentially, you're following the I do, we do, and you do model, where I show you how it is done, we do it together, but I gradually reduce your dependence on me until I see that you can do it independently. Okay, and that's when we're at the last stage, okay, application, where the teacher helps the students to practice the strategy until they can apply it independently. Right? So for whatever skill that you're teaching the student, it is highly recommended, okay, that you follow this structure to increase the students' confidence in applying the strategy. And in a sense, because they are constantly practicing the skill till they reach that independent stage, right? They are also increasing that automaticity and fluency. Okay? So while I've shared about inferencing, okay, you've also seen that there are many other comprehension skills that students need, okay, to help them access text and, of course, eventually answer text-related questions. So to find out more about these skills, okay, this short webinar, so I can to share a couple of tips, okay, but to find out more about these other skills, do join us at our comprehension workshop that's coming up soon. All right, thank you.
I hope you had a fruitful understanding from the topic in today's session. Before we start the Q&A session, we'd like to hear from you as we value your feedback. On the screen, we have shared the QR code for our feedback form, as well as links to other DAS websites for your reference. Do spare a minute or two to complete the feedback form for us. In addition, we'll be sharing our upcoming courses by DAS Academy. We will now start our Q&A session and will take about 10 to 15 minutes. You may ask questions relevant to this today's session, and we'll try our best to answer. We have our speaker, Ms. Siti Mariam, with us today. Mariam is a lead educational therapist at DAS, as well as a lecturer at DAS Academy. Ms. Mariam will be accompanied by Ms. Rebecca Shalina, who is also a lead educational therapist at DAS and associate lecturer with DAS Academy. Ms. Mariam will help to address educational questions, while I will be helping with queries pertaining to our learning centers. So over to you, Mariam, on the first question.
Thank you, Victor. There's one question from a participant. Okay, how do we decide what to do? So this is with regards to wordless videos. How do we decide what to do before video viewing? I see Rebecca is typing an answer, but I will just provide some input as well. So for which kind of learners, topics, or situations do we do some pre-viewing discussion? Okay, so when you want to move on to our wordless animated videos, I think there's not really a need to do some pre-viewing discussion. Okay, but what you could do is, as I mentioned in my session earlier, you will need to build up that prior knowledge. Okay, so when you choose a video, you might want to ensure that the child has that relevant prior knowledge. Okay, so for example, like what I've shared earlier, okay, I think the video is based in Greek, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, it looks like it's in Greece. Okay, so perhaps the child may not have that relevant prior knowledge, right? Okay, so you might want to choose something that's more relatable to the learner. Okay, something that they're more familiar with before you decide. Okay, let's choose this. Let's get the learner to watch these videos. I mean, aside from videos, right? Pictures. Okay, I've also talked about pictures. Yeah, so it can just be one picture, okay, or a series of pictures. Okay, the picture that I showed earlier is actually from a book called A Ball for Daisy. Okay, so A Ball for Daisy, and there's another book called Pancakes for Breakfast as well. Okay, so these books are wordless, all right, and it's just basically pictures, and you have to follow the structure, you know, page by page, picture by picture. So the child needs to create their own story in that sense. Okay, infer from what's happening in the book, and what's happening in the pictures, and then make sure, okay, it also develops sequencing skills. So you kind of have to put all the ideas together to form a flow in the story. Okay, so another thing that you could do, okay, you can get just sequencing cards. Okay, you can actually go online, you can Google sequencing cards, you can print and you can laminate. And then what happens is the sequencing cards are also wordless. Okay, so the child can talk about, oh, what he sees here, okay, and then arrange the pictures in sequence and then infer the story from the sequence of cards. So an example I can give, there's one set of sequencing cards that I can just think of my mind now. Okay, it's a series of cards where the parent brings the child to the supermarket, and then the whole flow that happens when you go to the supermarket. Okay, you take the trolley, you take the things of in the supermarket, and you go to the checkout counter, you pay your stuff, and then you go back to the car, and then you load the things in the boot, and so on and so forth. So firstly, okay, the child has to arrange the cards in sequence. So actually you're developing that sequencing skill as well, which is very important for comprehension also. And then the child needs to infer, okay, from the facial expressions, okay, from the things that are happening in the picture, and then talk about it. So they can form like maybe they can start with short phrases, okay, to talk about what's happening. And then as they gain more confidence, you can get them to form full sentences. Okay, so just one sentence based on one card. And then eventually, okay, you can get them to form a paragraph of what they're seeing in the pictures as well. Okay, then I have another question from another participant. Are you able to demonstrate the I do, we do, you do strategy? Okay, so yes, I can do that. Hang on, the question just disappeared. Okay, all right, so for example, if I were to model the inner conversation, okay, so I would actually show a short text. Okay, class, today we are going to try and make sense of this passage. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask questions as I read the passage. Okay, so I will just start off with a short passage because I want to model the skill, right? So I will go, okay, I will read maybe a few sentences and I will ask myself, this is interesting. Okay, I wonder why, the author, the character came back late. Did she finish work late or was she held up in something? So I'll write notes at the side of the passage. Okay, and then I'll go on to read. Okay, maybe the passage is talking about how her hair is disheveled. Okay, how she just threw herself down at the sofa. So I can ask questions. She does seem like that she's very tired. It seems like she's had a long day. Okay, I would want to find out what she did for the day to make her so tired. Okay, so as I'm doing that, I'm verbalizing my questions out loud so that the learner can follow the passage and at the same time follow my thought process, okay, and look at the questions or the sentences that I've crafted at the side. Okay, so that is I do. They see me doing it. Okay, then after that, we do together. Let's try the next two paragraphs together. Okay, so I'll start with the first two sentences. Okay, I'm going to read the sentence and these are my questions at the side. Why don't you read the second sentence, the third sentence for me, fourth sentence for me? What are some of the questions that come up in your mind as you think about the sentence? Okay, so they can, maybe the character is hungry, maybe she's angry. Okay, what could have caused her anger? Okay, so you can actually write. You can careful them to write the questions at the side. So if they are stuck, okay, you can give them prompting questions. Why do you think the character is like that? Okay, what can you see in the sentence that makes you wonder about certain things? Okay, so in the initial stage, they may be stuck. Okay, they may not know how to do certain of the skills that you've taught. So it's very important to give them prompting questions. So always have with you a set of prompting questions that you can refer to, okay, when you actually you are at the we do stage. Okay, so maybe then the next passage would be, okay, I'm going to give you the bulk of the paragraph to try and craft your questions. Okay, I'll just do the last two sentences. Okay, so you're gradually reducing the dependence. Okay, you're seeing that they can do it before you just let it go. Okay, I see that you're quite confident in this already. I'm going to give you a next passage. Okay, and I want you to try and do it yourself. Okay, but sometimes doesn't mean that they are already at the they do stage. Okay, they're that confident. You may have to sometimes move back between the we do and you do stage, back and forth until that you find that they're fully confident in that particular skill. All right, then let's see, we have, okay, there's another question. Right, if a child reads silently and actually read a number of words wrongly, she would have understood the passage wrongly and didn't know it herself. Okay, so that's the problem, yes. So if a child reads silently, definitely they will, you will not be sure if they've misread certain words, and therefore their understanding of the passage could be incorrect. So of course, it will be good to encourage the child to read out loud. Okay, so when you read out loud, they read out loud, you can actually hear whether they are reading the words correctly. Okay, and of course you can guide them to read the words correctly as well. Okay, but what you can do is, if they're still not fluent in reading, you can do something called paired reading. Okay, so paired reading, a parent or a child can read together, or a more advanced learner can read together with the child. So they will start reading together. Okay, but you need to develop some kind of signal that will not interrupt the reading. So let's say you read together, and then slowly, once the weaker child is more confident, maybe they can tap 2 times on the book. Okay, this tap indicates that, okay, can you stop reading now? Let me try it myself. So they'll go on to read. Okay, if they find that they're having problems, okay, then they can tap maybe another 2 times to let the advanced learner, can you join in with me now? Because I'm not too confident with this set of words. Okay, so you're not interrupting the reading, but you're all developing that reading fluency at the same time and developing that confidence in the learner. So you can try paired reading. Okay, I think the most important thing here is to develop that fluency first. Okay, so when there's more automaticity and when there's more fluency, there's more capacity for reading comprehension. And I think when we talk about reading comprehension, right, let's not forget listening comprehension as well. Okay, so a lot of times we think that, reading comprehension is more important, but it actually starts with listening comprehension, right? Okay, so listening is a skill that sometimes we kind of undervalue, okay, but there is a difference between hearing and listening. Okay, so when they hear, they're just taking in that auditory information, but when they listen, they are processing and interacting with the information. And sometimes this could be, incorrect. Okay, so you need to build up that listening comprehension skill, even if the child is not fluent in reading yet. Okay, you can do it concurrently. Okay, so it can be verbal, discussions. You can build up the oral language. You can talk to them about pictures. You can give them questions and they can just answer you verbally. Okay, and then once they're more fluent in reading, you can transfer that skill to a reading text. All right, so we have another question. Is it true that when a child, this is a math-related question. So is it true that when a child is not able to read, they have difficulties in understanding math? That's a whole new topic for itself. Okay, so yes, if you look at the characteristics of dyslexia again, we have phonological processing difficulties, working memory, as well as processing speed. So if you were to go back to the example that I shared, and then you struggle with one word, okay, if you struggle with one word, you don't make sense of the word, what more of all the other words in the text. So if imagine they are going for almost every single word in a passage, in a short word problem, by the time they reach the end of the word problem, they'll be like, I don't know what I read. Okay, so if when you ask them, so what do you read? They will say, I don't know. This is usually true because they really did not know what they have just read, because all the mental capacity was just focused on trying to make sense of the words. Okay, they had no other mental capacity left, focused on the comprehension. Okay, therefore, they did not understand what the question was talking about. With no comprehension, they will have difficulty understanding the question. Okay, with no comprehension, they will have difficulty in answering the question. So they may just, pick numbers, just put them numbers together. They pick up keywords. They're not actually reading the question in its entirety. So yes, but there's a lot more to that. So if you're interested, you can actually attend our math workshop, which is actually happening in 2 weeks' time. All right. Okay.
Thank you, Mariam. I think we have shared a lot of tips with the parents in general. So in view of time, would you like to take one last question live before we proceed with today's session, please?
Okay. Let's try one more question. Okay. My child is in primary 4. Would it be helpful to make him read a paragraph, try to understand it, and make annotations? Yes, actually, that will be very helpful. Okay, what you're actually doing here is you are getting him to do that inner conversation, and you're also getting him to identify the main idea and significant details of the question. So you're actually incorporating 2 comprehension skills as well. Okay, so he's reading. Okay, he may need to read more than once. Okay, then he tries to. Okay, actually, you can even get him to visualize. So with each paragraph, you can get him to visualize what he's reading, so that it helps in understanding. And he can make annotations at the side, ask himself questions. Okay, encourage him to be active, be an active reader, and then pick out what is the main idea. So from that main idea, from him picking out the gist of the passage of the paragraph, you can roughly see, whether he understands that particular paragraph or not. Then you can go on to the next paragraph. So actually, you can do the I do, we do, model for this. Maybe you can start with one paragraph, he can go on to the next paragraph, and then you can do it together. Okay, and then eventually, maybe towards the end, let's see whether he can do it independently. All right. Thank you for all your questions. We may not be able to answer all your questions today, but we will follow up with you. And I also see that some are asking on the titles of the various wordless books and sequencing cards. We will follow up with you all accordingly as well. All right.
Yes, thank you, Mariam. Thank you for the questions. We apologize if we were not able to answer them live for all your questions, but don't worry, after today's session, we will definitely follow up with you with an email. I think most of the questions posed or what Mariam has shared are actually in response to the queries on how to help your child at home, in terms of reading, understanding, and such. It is not easy, but we do need, as parents and educators, we do need certain skills, different skills to help our children and our students in class. Of course, the mainstream way of teaching your child probably is not helpful, so we need a specialized way of doing it. In DAS Academy, there are many workshops, short ones and others that may span over a few days, different topics, to help your children. And these are all to train the caregivers and parents, on alternative and possibly dyslexic friendly way on helping your child. So do log into our DAS Academy website and see what are the coming courses in the next few weeks or months. I'm sure you'll find some that will help you and empower you to help your child at home. So we'll come to the end of just the Q&A session today. And our next, just to share some information before we part, the next webinar that we will have, it's entitled English Exam Skills. This will be held on the 2nd of September, which is on a Thursday. And you may get more information on our website, DAS Academy website, and registration is already open. Do sign up if you are keen on attending the next webinar. So for DAS Academy courses, just to share a little, the coming courses that we will have in the month of August, we'll be developing your child's comprehension skills on 25th of August, followed by Clever and Cluttered, developing your child's executive function, 18th of August, and Certificate in Supporting SPLD Learners in Executive Function Skills, which is on the 30th of August. The details may be found in our DAS Academy website, so you may like to log onto the website to find out more, and I do definitely believe that these courses will be beneficial to you in supporting your child at home. Now, with all these exciting courses for the month of August and beyond, we also like to share some other information, two more information. Firstly, it is if you are practitioners in a field of specific learning difficulties and differences in education, we like you to encourage you to join RETA, which stands for Register of Educational Therapists Asia. It is an initiative by DAS to bring together SPLD practitioners. Teachers and allied educators can certainly qualify to be a RETA member. However, the good news is that you don't necessarily have to be a practitioner to be a RETA member, as there are different levels of membership. Regardless of the membership level, RETA members get to enjoy a 10% discount on courses and workshops conducted by DAS Academy. To find out more about RETA, please visit the website www.reta.sg for more details and how to sign up. The next, also to support the workshops and courses by DAS Academy, there is the availability of the Caregivers Training Grant, or CTG, which you see on the screen right now. This is to support caregivers of any persons with disabilities or learning difficulties in attending the training. The amount of grant is $200 per care recipient, and this can be utilized during a year which is starts on the 1st of April and it ends on 31st of March the following year. For each of the course, you can use up to a total of $200 for all the courses, and there is a co-payment of $10 for each course registration. So again, do go to our website, DAS Academy, for more information on CTG and on the courses that's available. So we look forward to seeing you in the coming courses and the next webinar. So with that, thank you very much for joining us today, and here's wishing all a great weekend ahead. Thank you very much.